Oh, and January 1939, in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, a group of German SS officers and scientists set up their tripods and cameras. Led by anthropologist Bruno Beger, the team measured heads, recorded skull lengths, nose angles, and eye colors of monks, peasants, soldiers, and other locals. Beger's colleague Ernst Krauss filmed the entire process. Over the course of 2 months, the expedition collected nearly 400 anthropometric records, 50 plaster face masks, and hundreds of photographs. Yet none of the locals had any idea why the SS officers were so obsessed with documenting every single detail. In this episode, we will explore how occult beliefs nearly became the state religion of the Third Reich. We will talk about who the Aryans were, where they came from, where they went, what German archaeologists tried to unearth in Crimea, and ultimately how the Nazi expedition to Tibet ended. After Germany's defeat in the First World War, the country fell into a deep crisis. It lost territory, was forced to pay reparations, and had to drastically reduce its army. The economy was crushed under the weight of hyperinflation. Nationalist and occult circles blamed the church for this bitter situation and for the military defeat. Christianity, they claimed, was a religion of submission, invented by despised Semites to weaken the German will to fight. True strength, they argued, could only be found by returning to their roots, Nordic traditions, and pre-Christian cults. The Nazi fascination with the occult did not appear out of nowhere. It grew out of the so-called Völkisch movement of the late 19th century, which fused ethnic nationalism with esotericism. One of its prophets was the Austrian writer Guido von List, a fanatic admirer of runes who promoted the revival of ancient religion and the creation of a new pan-Germanic empire. In such a state, the so-called Aryans, blonde Nordic people, seen as descendants of the gods, were meant to rule. Racial theorists Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels and Italian far-right philosopher Julius Evola expanded this myth, adding ideas of divine Aryan origins, racial biology, spiritual hierarchy, and a heavy dose of anti-Semitism. Inspired by their writings, as well as Helena Blavatsky's teachings about divine ancestors, German occultist Rudolf von Sebetendorf founded the mystical Thule Society in Munich. Its ideology, a volatile mix of occultism, racism, and ultranationalism, deeply influenced the leadership of the Nazi Party. Heinrich Himmler, though not a member himself, studied the works of its most active followers. From his student days, Himmler was fascinated with runes and the works of von List, as well as pagan rituals. When he became Reichsführer SS, he set out to turn the SS into a center of medieval cult traditions. He introduced mystical rituals, rune symbolism, and knightly attributes. In 1933, Himmler even recruited Karl Maria Willigut, a former psychiatric patient and rune specialist who proclaimed himself a descendant of Thor. Willigut convinced Himmler that Germans were descended from superhumans and needed their own religion. Himmler resolved to end Christianity, what he called the greatest plague, and replace it with pagan practices from the old Germanic faith. He ordered the SS to abandon Christmas and instead celebrate the winter solstice, or Yule, with the ritual lighting of an eternal flame and the exchange of symbolic candlesticks. The summer solstice was celebrated as a festival of light's triumph, supposedly in honor of the Aryan solar origins. Yet most Germans continued to celebrate Christmas in the traditional way. Nazi leaders hesitated to push their pagan experiments too openly, fearing open conflict with the churches and the faithful. But within the SS, things were very different. Himmler forbade members of the organization to marry without special permission, as he intended to create a racially pure clan. Brides had to prove Aryan ancestry free from undesirable bloodlines dating back to 1800, while SS officers had to trace theirs as far back as 1750. The wedding ritual, called the SS Eheschließung, took place in a hall decorated with runes, where a sword was used in place of a Bible. The baptism of a child was replaced by the Namensweihe ceremony, during which the infant was touched not with a cross, but with the honorary SS dagger. Himmler leased Wewelsburg Castle for the symbolic price of 1 Reichsmark per year, with the intention of turning it into an educational and ideological center for the highest SS commanders. In its northern tower, they created a ceremonial hall for group leaders with 12 columns and a circular floor ornament representing the sun wheel. The castle also housed collections of art and antiquities. During the war, it was used for official meetings, including the SS leadership gathering just before the invasion of the Soviet Union. In later years, neo-Nazis turned Wewelsburg into a cult site, inventing countless legends about mystical rituals. Though in reality, apart from the weddings of select SS officers, little of this was ever practiced. If you've made it this far, it's a good moment to hit the like button. And if you're still watching without subscribing, please support the channel by clicking subscribe. On July 1, 1935, in Himmler's office, the German Society for the Study of Ancient Germanic History and Ancestral Heritage, better known as the Ahnenerbe, was founded. Its first president was the Dutch-German folklorist Herman Wirth. Himmler himself chaired the supervisory board, while Wolfram Sievers was appointed general secretary. With state funding secured, the institute opened its first research departments, focusing on runes, linguistics, Germanic studies, and mythology. Eventually, the number of departments grew to nearly 50. Almost immediately, Ahnenerbe researchers set out in search of traces of the ancient Aryans. In his key work, The Myth of the 20th Century, one of the highest-ranking Nazis, Alfred Rosenberg, wrote of legendary lands. Thule, the northern realm associated with Iceland or Greenland, and Hyperborea, the land of the eternal sun. According to Nazi ideology, this was the original homeland of the Aryans, from which conquerors had set out to build the great civilizations of Europe, Iran, and India. The first Ahnenerbe expedition to finish Karelia was led by ethnographer Jorjo von Gronhagen and musicologist Fritz Bose. Their mission was to trace the origins of the Kalevala epic and to document shamanic rituals as supposed evidence of the Nordic roots of the German people. They managed to record the ceremonies of the shamaness Miran Aku and meet a folk singer, Timo Lipitsa, who preserved very ancient songs. Himmler was so impressed that he hung Lipitsa's photograph in his office, almost like an icon.
Nazi ideologues introduced the concept of the racial soul. Rosenberg put it this way: the soul is the race viewed from within, and conversely, the race is the external aspect of the soul. This idea became the foundation of the Lebensborn program, which focused on the birth of children of pure Nordic descent and fueled the search for the ideal Aryans. This marked the beginning of Ahnenerbe's most famous expedition, Ernst Schaeffer's journey to Tibet. The plan was personally approved by Himmler, who hoped to find descendants of the so-called early Aryans, who he believed had once conquered much of Asia. In Himmler's view, even the Buddha himself was an Aryan of the Nordic race. After lengthy negotiations with the Tibetan authorities, the Germans received permission to conduct several weeks of research. Officially, their studies focused on local flora, fauna, climate, and culture. They brought back to Germany rare animal species, pelts, and taxidermy specimens, as well as thousands of seed samples, many of which are still preserved today at the Museum of Natural History in Berlin. The Tibetan collection of the Munich Ethnographic Museum was built largely on the hundreds of ritual objects and manuscripts they acquired. Most importantly, however, the results of the anthropologists' work, gathered under SS guard, were carefully shipped back to Ahnenerbe headquarters in Germany by trains and ships.
In 1942-43, Ahnenerbe, together with SS archaeologists and Rosenberg staff, carried out excavations in Crimea, including around the Mangup-Kale fortress. They were looking for proof that local sites were connected to the Goths in order to justify the idea of creating a colony called Gotengau, a Gothic district for German settlers. But among the pottery, weapon fragments, and manuscripts uncovered, no convincing evidence of Gothic heritage was ever found. At first, such activities might have seemed like harmless games, but that changed when the Ahnenerbe Institute for Military Scientific Research was created under Wolfram Sievers. It soon became responsible for brutal experiments in concentration camps, most notably Dachau. Prisoners were plunged into freezing water or left naked in the cold to determine how long a person could survive hypothermia. Others were locked in low-pressure chambers, simulating altitudes of over 15,000 meters. The results were used to design clothing, survival equipment, and instructions for Luftwaffe pilots. Ahnenerbe also commissioned a collection of Jewish skeletons, intended, so they claimed, to preserve the image of the Jewish race after its extermination. For this purpose, 86 Jewish prisoners were murdered. After the war, several Ahnenerbe doctors, including Siegfried Ruff, Hans Wolfgang Romberg, and Helmut Poppendick, were tried at the doctors' trial in Nuremberg. All three were acquitted, as the court ruled there was insufficient proof they knew the experiments would be fatal. Poppendick was later convicted for other crimes. You can find our video on the main Nuremberg trials linked in the description. As Germany neared defeat, Ahnenerbe's work wound down. In its final months, it focused mainly on medical experiments, evacuating archives, and concealing incriminating material. In April 1945, Ahnenerbe members transported part of their collections to the Bavarian Alps and Austria. The organization's general secretary, Wolfram Sievers, was convicted and executed for crimes against humanity tied to the Dachau experiments. Walter Wiest, the Society's scientific director, was arrested but eventually acquitted. In the post-war years, countless legends about Ahnenerbe spread. Stories of the search for the Holy Grail, secret Tibetan knowledge, and rituals at Wewelsburg Castle. Much of this was fueled by pop culture, especially the Indiana Jones films. In reality, the Society's main role was providing pseudo-scientific justifications for Nazi racial policy and military expansion. Its archives were partly seized by the Allies and Soviet intelligence, while its collections were scattered among museums and private holdings. The skull measurements from Tibet, for example, ended up in U.S. classified archives, but contributed nothing of real value to science. Further research never confirmed any Aryan origin for Tibetans, nor did it alter our understanding of human migration. Ahnenerbe's most expensive expedition, meant to prove its grand theories, turned out to be a complete failure. The paradox of the Third Reich is that a major industrial power placed its bets on mysticism, racial dogma, and a new state religion in order to justify conquest. And what do you think? Was Himmler's occult project of any use at all, or nothing more than a dangerous delusion? Share your thoughts in the comments.